Hello, I'm Zan-Mισέλ Κουστώ, and welcome to Stories of the Sea. Just over 50 years ago, my father and Έμιλ Γκανιάν developed the Aqua Lung. By the late 1940s, they were providing their water lung to divers around the world. Since then, improvement in scuba diving equipment have enabled millions of divers to explore the world's oceans, offering a whole new view of our water planet. Come with us as we trace the early history of underwater diving and meet some of the pioneers whose bravery has given us the opportunity to uncover the mysteries of the sea.
It is majestic and powerful, full of dark mysteries and graceful secrets, and it roars with a passion and beauty that's unsurpassed in all of nature. Below its undulating, rolling waves, the strange and alien world of the ocean is regarded with awe by virtually every person who's ever seen it, including our own primordial ancestors. Yet despite the awesome qualities of the ocean, this final frontier has long been a fearful place, and for thousands of years, a puzzling and complex enigma to mankind. For countless centuries, the ocean has been the great provider for humanity. Yet throughout the generations of men and women who've depended upon the ocean for sustenance, or have sailed across it in great wooden ships for commerce, few of them had the courage to dive into it, to explore its depths or discover its secrets. The human ocean experience has been plagued with problems from the very beginning of recorded history. The reality was that people were often simply afraid to go into the water. Many of the sailors from the ships who'd been chosen to explore the sea were haunted by the monstrous tall tales of giant sea serpents who reportedly swam underwater in bloodthirsty packs, looking for crowded and unsuspecting ships to attack. Over the millennia, there was no history of diving because potential divers refused to enter this netherworld of sea monsters. According to popular myth, these great monsters of the deep were always ravenous for the salty taste of a human intruder. One of the most infamous and grotesque legends of these mythical sea monsters was the Norwegian Kraken. This devilish creature was reported to be over 1.5 miles wide and could easily sink an entire ship, sending hundreds of terrified sailors to their deaths. Ultimately, most of these myths were debunked, and the history of diving, although still plagued by a significant problem, began for real. The problem was the limitations of the human body itself. Humans simply could not breathe underwater. Even the most capable diver was restricted in his ability to explore by the breath-holding capacity of his lungs. No one knows for certain when the first diver took a large gulp of air and just dove in. But according to most historical accounts, it was some 5,000 years ago. Men dove for a variety of reasons: to gather food, to collect items for commerce, and even dove to explore and satisfy their own curiosity. This 6th century BC sketch shows a Greek diver about to descend into the ocean, probably in search of sponges, which were especially valuable during that era. Whatever their reasons for diving, a search was soon born for ways that would allow a person to stay under the surface longer in order to better accomplish whatever goal the diver had in mind. How this was accomplished stands as perhaps the greatest challenge in the history of diving. This Assyrian frieze from 900 BC demonstrates the concept of one such attempt. It was called a breathing bag, an inflated leather pouch filled with air that was supposed to supply a diver with enough oxygen to function for a prolonged period of time. It was unfortunately a better flotation device than a breathing apparatus, and it failed miserably. Other devices used were breathing tubes made from reeds and hollowed-out bones. This 1511 design demonstrates how a diver's head is wrapped in a leather bag, which is then attached to a breathing tube. It didn't work either. Then, during the Renaissance age, one of the 16th century's greatest inventors, Leonardo da Vinci, tinkered with the notion of a diving device. Although it was ingeniously designed, da Vinci's contraption was destined not to work. When a mind as fertile as da Vinci's failed to accomplish this goal, it was indeed a strong testament to the ongoing difficulty of solving this underwater riddle. In the meantime, the diver was required to hold his breath every time he or she dove into the water. Yet even the most durable diver, like Felui, a renowned Polynesian pearl diver, can hold his breath for just a few minutes. During this dive that he and his assistant made in a lagoon just off a Tahitian island, he went searching for his most precious bounty, oyster shells, and the mother of pearl inside them. Felui's equipment consists essentially of rope and a pair of goggles and two of the world's stoutest lungs. So all Felui has to depend on is his skill and his tremendous lung power, enabling him to hold his breath underwater for as long as 4 minutes. There are, however, several techniques that every good free diver must learn to become successful. As a successful and knowledgeable pearl diver, Felui has learned that one of these techniques is the method in which he reaches the bottom. He cannot just sink down to the oyster beds, as it would take too much time and energy. So instead, he uses a shot line equipped with a lead weight that he'll use to lower himself to the depth of 120 feet. Notice now how this diving legend is holding his breath while he's doing his job. Even at these depths, this pearl diver extraordinaire has no problem gathering his livelihood and placing them gently in the large baskets. One of the other problems that he faces during his free dives is that at depths of 120 feet, the water pressure exerts about 60 pounds per square inch on his body. He must take special care that he takes no unnecessary chances in his work. And when he rises to the surface, he must make certain that he gets there before he even comes close to running out of air. Once he's broken the surface and has arrived back on shore, he and his assistant take great pride in the abundance of wealth the ocean has given to them. This mother of pearl is an important item in their and perhaps even your economy. The pearl they've collected could possibly end up being made into the buttons on your shirt or the knife handles of your own kitchen cutlery. Several years ago on the island of Bora Bora, some islanders searched for specific species of native plant called the pura root. In the old Tahitian culture, divers use this root to stun or dope the fish, making them far easier to capture. Once the divers had gathered up this root, they would boat out to selected spots in the waters of the lagoon. These reefs vary in depth from 6 to 10 feet deep and are filled with coral that almost reaches the surface. The divers would take great care to keep their pura root as dry as possible before they actually used it. This rarely seen form of fishing is no longer legally practiced. Many environmentally conscious fishermen believe that doping fish was both unnatural and unhealthy to the fishing region. Today, there is a devastating development to this style of fishing, and in certain areas, fishermen have actually taken the act of doping fish a terrible step further by using cyanide poison to capture live fish for markets. This unfortunate practice is currently threatening vast expanses of the Indo-Pacific reefs. These Pacific reefs, ecologists say, are the de facto epicenter of the world's oceanic biological diversity. After one region is used up and devastated, the cyanide fishermen simply move on to yet another pristine reef, and to another, until finally nothing is left. When this film was shot in the early 60s, these islanders knew nothing about cyanide poisoning. They were merely following an age-old custom handed down from generation to generation. Once a coral spot was selected as a good prospect, the divers shook a handful of the pura root into the caves and crannies. The whitish cloud of juice and pulp would penetrate the coral, and the milky substance of the root starts to cloud the water. It only took a few moments before the root began to take effect on the fish. Then literally, hundreds of fish would drift from their hiding places. The root drugged some of them into a stupor. Others were killed by the root's effects. Historically, there have been no reports that divers or the islanders suffered any harmful effects from the lagoon or from eating the drugged fish. Although free diving continues to exist in many places today, primarily by the South Pacific divers or as a sport for people all over the world, the history of diving enjoyed a special breakthrough in underwater breathing in the 17th century. This breakthrough came in the form of a barrel. During the 1970s, Colonel John D. Craig, one of diving's earliest pioneers, made a television documentary about the history of diving. Colonel Craig was one of history's great free divers, but here he's talking about that first great breakthrough discovery.
In the early 1600s, a man named Phipps, during a treasure hunt to Silver Shoals, discovered that when a barrel was lowered in the water, open end down, an air bubble would be trapped inside, and a diver could put his head in and get a new breath of fresh air. Unfortunately, though, it was from this period, too, that we have our first mention of diving casualties, mostly from suffocation. For while his first diving bell worked, the air trapped inside wouldn't last forever.
The fatalities that occurred in the early days of diving marked the moment the divers first really understood that the greatest dangers humans faced in the sea were not the monsters of myth, but the mistakes divers themselves made. Then, when the earliest inventors failed to come up with any apparatus that was truly successful, the diving world tried something else, and finally they'd found something that worked. What you're about to see is one of the earliest recorded films of a hard hat dive, recorded in 1926 when Colonel Craig was shooting one of his earliest underwater documentaries. Later, when Colonel Craig was continuing with his hard hat dives, he found some additional problems facing him that continue to have relevance for today's diver. The helmet is something less than the perfect viewing port. You have to constantly be on the lookout for undesirable characters who might be lurking in the neighborhood. That was true then and remains true today. Although man doesn't have any natural enemies of the deep, he must keep his eyes open in case any of the local big guys mistake him for a fresh, plump fish. Hard hat diving continues to be done today, although it's used primarily in commercial or military diving. Its continued purpose is simple. With hard hat diving, a diver can go deeper toward the bottom of the ocean than with any other type of equipment. Perhaps the greatest frustration of man's challenge to the sea has been the fact that, unlike his gilled neighbors in the ocean, he must always replenish his air supply. The invention that most changed diving's history was a submersible device which allowed divers to take their breathing medium with them. Finally, for the first time in the history of diving, a diver had a freedom that was almost equal to the creatures of the sea. Equally important, perhaps, is the fact that with the advent of the Aqua Lung, diving was taken out of the realm of military frogmen and intrepid adventurers and was brought directly to the people for all to enjoy. The beauty and pageantry of the sea, that was until then reserved for only a few people, could now be felt and savored as a personal experience to anyone who was willing to train for it. Although scuba diving, especially during the 1950s and 60s, gained an enormous popularity with the recreational diver, it was especially useful to the Navy. One of the most extraordinary discoveries in the history of diving was made by the U.S. Navy when it was testing scuba divers. and one of the great creatures of the sea, the dolphin. The incredible discovery was that the dolphin was a human lifesaver. Two military divers were out on a routine mission when they became disoriented and lost. They couldn't find their way back to their undersea lab. And at the depth they were diving, any attempt to surface would have been fatal. After the Navy had exhausted all possible means, a trained dolphin named Tuffy was sent out to find the men. It didn't take Tuffy long to locate these disoriented divers by using his built-in sonar system. Tuffy then passed the divers a lifeline, which had been tied to a ring, and the divers returned to safety. Diving history includes a great deal of animal training projects that have helped in exploring the ocean. There's a page from the history of diving that deserves a special mention, since it was one of the most ambitious projects ever attempted. It was noted by Colonel John D. Craig in his 1970s documentary, Man Against the Sea, and involves the care, feeding, and training of pilot whales. Some experts claim that pilot whales are the most intelligent animal on Earth, next to the human. This particular project was designed and supervised by the U.S. Navy and had to do with training the whale to disarm a test torpedo. In this case, the whale was fitted with a large clamp that at the moment the whale nooses it around the torpedo, a spring mechanism is triggered and locks onto the torpedo. At the same moment, the valve of a gas cylinder opens and a balloon begins to fill with air. The whale, meanwhile, has arrived safely back at the ship. Although this was a relatively minor test, it demonstrated, even during Colonel Craig's time, that there's a deep connection between man and the creatures of the sea. One of the great friendships that have ever been documented between man and animal is the friendship between us and the dolphin. As long as 2,000 years ago, there have been historical reports of dolphins not only playing with swimmers, but actually helping them from dangerous situations. For reasons that are still unclear, the dolphin apparently enjoys mankind's company. Whether it's our relationship with the creatures of the sea or the improvements that have been made since the first scuba diving equipment came along, the next 30 years, from the 60s to the 90s, would bring change that mankind would have previously never thought possible. When scuba diving finally allowed people to become recreational divers, the pace of change became incredibly fast. As more people began exploring the underwater world, there were more improvements made in the equipment they used. The first major change in scuba gear was the dual hose being converted into a single hose system. It was less cumbersome, easier to maintain, and allowed the diver to breathe much better. Another major innovation was the ability to monitor the air in a diver's tank. A tank pressure gauge was added. Then, by removing the depth gauge from the diver's wrist, a console system or an information station was developed. These innovators also added a buoyancy compensator, so a diver could achieve neutral buoyancy at any depth. Another innovation was to actually remove the buoyancy compensator from the diver's neck and put it on the tank itself. Early diving masks were made from rubber with an oval faceplate. This classic design was to last for many years. Later, a wraparound style mask was introduced. This concept was the most innovative change in mask design. Today, most masks are made with silicone, incorporate color, and are easy to clear. Nowadays, fins are no longer made exclusively of rubber. Although rubber is still used in the foot pocket, fin blades of today incorporate lightweight, colorful thermal plastics without compromising thrust. These various innovations were incredibly successful in allowing the diver to go anywhere with more ease and safety, allowing greater access to the variety of other creatures in the sea. Sharks may be the most well-known of the creatures of the ocean, and most every diver, experts say, will one day run into a shark. Although they have rightly earned their reputation as furious eating machines, the history of diving has never chronicled a story of a shark attacking a human because it was out to get him. One of the most important discoveries in the history of diving is the fact that sharks had no interest in humans, either as friends or as a meal. They are, however, potentially dangerous creatures, and every diver must use the utmost caution whenever he is around any shark, from a large great white to the medium-sized blue shark, or even to the relatively small sand shark. In supervised, controlled situations, using a shark cage, it is possible to experience the thrill of sharing the same space with an ultimate predator, such as the blue sharks in the waters of Southern California.
When I'm in the water, one-on-one, and they're going around me, I'm kind of laid back. I don't in any way try to slap the shark as it comes to me. I wait. And as it swims nearer, I put my hand out and stroke the shark. It's a fantastic feeling.
When a diver uses the training he or she received to become certified, there is very little chance that he'll ever be involved in a shark attack. If, however, a diver is challenged by a shark, one of the great discoveries in the history of diving is a shark repellent. Shark scientists have discovered that perhaps the best repellents are based on what nature has provided. Dr. Eugenie Clark, a pioneer in undersea research, first recognized that a little fish found in the Red Sea, the Moses sole, secretes a substance that appeared to be a naturally occurring shark repellent. Researchers have since synthesized a chemical with similar properties and have been using this repellent to ward off a shark attack. Dr. Donald Nelson is one of the pioneers in this innovative process.
These are air-powered squirt guns that we use for testing the effectiveness of the chemical repellents.
With their test apparatus loaded, the divers enter the water and approach the sharks that have been attracted to the bait containers. The challenge facing the researchers is to repel the sharks while avoiding a bite. A quick blast of the chemical is all it takes. Scientists and researchers are continuing to work on fine-tuning this repellent concept, just as they're fine-tuning many other developments in the world of undersea exploration. The evolution of diving continues. In fact, it's just really beginning. And as many researchers have said, the future is now. As we look back to where the diving world once was in the beginning, then to where it was during the era of people like Colonel John D. Craig, we can easily see that it has surpassed what any of those early pioneers could have possibly imagined. Somewhere deep in the ocean, there are answers to questions we have yet to even ask. For every diver on Earth, this is a time for excitement, enthusiasm, and jaw-dropping awe. So whether it's for the fun of it, or the thrill of it, or for the scientific discovery of it, it's safe to say that the history of diving is really just beginning.
There are many reasons why recreational diving has become so popular. Foremost, diving is an exciting adventure that is mentally challenging. But the main reason people dive is perhaps directly related to mankind's need to explore, to seek out and know what's over the next hill or at the bottom of the ocean. The oceans are the last frontier left on Earth, and today's divers are its pioneers and trailblazers. With the technical advances made in the last 50 years, anyone in good health can explore and experience the mysteries of the sea. I'm Zan-Misélel Κουστώ, and this is Stories of the Sea.